Всем добрый день. Так у нас начинается.
Hello everyone. We are starting our third day in P7 room. Our first speaker is Alexey Fadeev. His presentation is how to write queries in an appropriate way and not make DBMS crazy. I would like to remind you that the presentation is being recorded now, so please raise your hands if you have any questions and ask your questions so that our audience would be able to listen to your questions and to the speaker's answers. And I would like to remind you that on the website, voting is conducted. You can vote for the presentation you liked best, and you can also select the best speaker. This speaker will be awarded in the end. Hello, friends. So, it has been loaded already. When the topic of my presentation was announced, the presenter did not manage ORM. So, I work in Seabage company from Tomsk city. We are developers. We develop new projects and new technological solutions. So we're working very actively, and it happened so that I write on C#.net, but I also like Postgres. Several years ago, this combination was quite rare, and people didn't really believe me because .NET as Windows technology, as Microsoft technology, is associated with Windows, closed commercial software, and Postgres is about Linux and open source. But the world is changing, and Microsoft turned its face to open source world. It has become friends with Linux. It is conducting various open source projects, and there was a very daring experiment and a successful one. The main technology of development, .NET, was rewritten, and now it supports various platforms including Linux, and all of these is open source. So Microsoft and Postgres technologies are becoming closer to each other. But today we will speak about ORM. So for many people, these three letters are associated with these kind of queries, or even worse. I think that here we have people that experienced that a database is quite slow, so you look at the query and you see that the query is so enormous. And after that, when you find out what they wanted to do, you understand that the operation itself was not difficult at all. That's why people think that ORM is something evil, that they always work slowly. I will try to show you that it's possible to write good queries, and this real query, you can see it on the slide, and on the right you can see similar query. When it was optimized in ORM, you can see that it became about 10 times smaller. Entity framework. This is ORM for .NET by default. This is a multifunctional ORM. It's quite similar to Hibernate for Java. That's about generating queries and mapping and many other things. So, fulfillment of operations, select operation through ORM includes two stages. Fulfillment of query SQL on DBMS, and the second stage is mapping. That is transforming these lines into the result of your programming. And this mapping is about overhead, so we would like to speak about optimization of it, so that the query does not change. What can we do? First of all, we can switch off the tracking of changes. What is it? Entity framework and Hibernate work in a similar way, so that when you pull data as objects, ORM starts monitoring the change of fields. When in the code you change fields and after that call save or submit method, then a query for update is generated. Well, in many select queries, you do not need to change this data by business logic. If this data is for reading only, you do not need tracking at all, and I do not recommend to use it for big volumes of data because this mechanism of updating through tracking is quite slow. That's why big volumes are updated in a circumventional way. I will show you how can it be switched off. In the end of the query, you should write as no tracking. So, here you can see the complete time of a query fulfillment, all the stages. This is Postgres 1 million entries in a table, 3 columns, entity framework. Yes, I forgot to mention that for the previous .NET, that is for Windows only, that is Entity Framework version 6, and for .NET Core, that is a cross-platform open source system, it is called Entity Framework Core. For the 6th Entity Framework, if you switch off tracking, your performance will be increased by the factor of 2. Now let's look at .NET Core. You can see that even if tracking is switched on, it works just as fast as EF6 when it's switched off. It means that developers have developed anti-framework core very well. They considered their previous mistakes and changed their architecture. That's why I suppose that tracking switching off will not give you the doubling of performance, but actually it turned out that performance will even triple if it's switched off. And this query, 1 million entries, can be fulfilled within less than 3 seconds. So what is the result? Switch off tracking. If I were anti-framework development, I would make it switched off by default and I would switch it on when necessary, but I'm not this developer, that's why please switch it off. And here you can see the comparison with tracking and without tracking. EF6 and EF Core, you can see the core works better in both cases, and I'd like to remind you that this is cross-platform solution that supports Linux. That's a real miracle. An interesting case. Once my colleague says, please help me, I can't understand it. This query returns similar lines. The quantity is right, but all objects are similar. When we checked it, it turned out that this is a view that does not have a primary key, and here the matter is tracking, because tracking applies changes by primary key, and this was anti-framework bug, so instead of falling, it returned similar objects. We switched off tracking and this query worked well. And there are cases when you do not need to switch off tracking because it is switched off by itself. By default, the results of query are received as entity objects. Entities are classes that correspond to the tables in your DBMS, but if you use select command and transform it, for example, use anonymous type, not necessarily anonymous one, in that case tracking will be switched off by itself and it works just as fast as if you wrote as no tracking. Entity Framework is not the only ORM that can be used for .NET. There is another popular solution, Dapper.NET. You can find a lot of information about it. They say that it works faster, but they do not write about the real speed. You know, developers write some fantastic figures, but I measured this. I compared one and the same query through anti-framework without tracking and through Deppin. EF6. The increase is 70%. That's quite good. .NET Core, the increase is 22%. It's not as good, but still. And I recalled one story. We were making a project and customers had very stringent requirements to performance of one operation. It was just their wish. And the base was designed in a bad way. MS SQL was used and it worked slowly. We were not sure that we would be able to fulfill these requirements, and when we talked to the customer about it, he said, okay, please to 50% from the necessary speed. We optimized everything, and the result was 90%. When we showed it, we thought it was good. And after that, they say, okay, well done, try to show me 100% result. I said, why? You said that 50% is okay, and he said, no, actually, even 100 is not sufficient for us. So conclusions may vary here, but one of them is 20% increase can help you to have your result accepted. Dapper.net, Dapper Database Mapper. This is micro URM. What is ORM, object relational mapping? It should do mapping, transformation into objects. And people are used to have entity framework and Hibernate that do everything, but actually these are additional bonuses. And ORM, first of all, should do mapping, and Deppin does it. It does not generate queries. Queries are written by the developer. And people that are skeptical, that think that ORM generates badly always, you can use Dapper and write SQL manually. Actually, Stack Overflow.com is developed on Dapper. But developers do not want to use SQL. They want to write code on their favorite programming language, and there is a solution. You can use Dapper. It has an advantage in terms of speed, and you won't need to write SQL. Actually, you can ask Entity Framework to generate SQL query, and it can be fulfilled by a different tool, for example, Dapper. There is an extension. You add it, and you write Dapper in the end of your query, and it will be fulfilled faster through Dapper. I looked at it, and it turned out that it is very simple. You add method toString to your query, and it will return SQL to you. But unfortunately, it works only in EF6, but in core, toString returns another thing, and it doesn't work. So I wanted to solve this issue, and I found a solution. This is a piece of code. It's quite large, and it doesn't really work fast. And all the speed advantage of Dapper can be nivellated by it. But I learned that there is another library. This is an alternative query generation that can be used with .NET Core. It works together with Dapper. Here you can see an example. For example, we want to find employees with high salaries. It can be fulfilled through Dapper. You don't need to use SQL. And there is another ORM, linked to DB. It is used for .NET. Developers say that it's even faster than Dapper, and it is multifunctional. So, they say that it can change Entity Framework. But I haven't tried to use it in production, and the project is not really popular. That's why I'm not sure in the quality of support and bugs fixing. So I cannot say that it really supported, but it can be used together with Entity Framework. Everything can be done on native framework, and some complicated queries can be fulfilled through Link2DB. Similar table, 1 million entries. We can see here that Link2DB can fulfill this query 1.5 times faster than Dapper and 2.6 times faster than Entity Framework. Entity Framework 6. So, the results. We have not considered the quality of query generation. We only looked at overhead for mapping. It can be decreased. Even if a query was generated well, it can be fulfilled slowly because of tracking. Tracking can be switched off, and other ORM can be used. And through this part can be optimized. We move on. Entity Framework and Hibernate have lazy loading. It was devised to facilitate the life of developers, but actually it created a lot of problems. What is it? This is an implementation of a connection one-to-many for ORM. For example, we have employees that work in departments. One department has many employees. The first line returns the first employee and generates SQL1. And the second line, man, it's the object. The employee has a field section. This is a link to the line of foreign key table that is connected to it, and when we address it, query to is generated. So query to section table is generated and we can get its name. It seems quite convenient. Lazy loading. It's like delayed loading. It is convenient because we get the data when we need them, but on the other hand, some people can say that you could have used one query, join query for it. Why do we need to do two query? But if the system is not highly loaded, well, two queries is okay. But if we do it not for one employee, but for a group of employees, for example, we take all employees, and in the cycle starting, we start to see their names, and the framework in every iteration of cycle generates this query and pulls sections separately. So if we have 1,000 departments, we will have 1,000 queries. That is not efficient at all. Of course, this information could have been pulled with one query only. And if the specialist is not experienced, this thing will create very high load for DBMS. In cases you could use only one query, and people wrote a lot of such code in many projects. And this is one of the main points for criticism of anti-framework. You can read a lot of criticism, and that's why EF core developers decided to switch off this thing by default. You can switch it on optionally, but I do not recommend you to do that. And these tasks can be solved through anti-framework very easily. We add include construction. So employees are added to department. One query is generated, and after that we can address this link to the department, and no more queries will be generated because all the data are stored in the memory. And you can address cascades through linked tables. For example, a department has a section, and we can include various types of syntaxes for it, and these links for linked tables can also be used. So we pool employees together with departments, and we search them by the name of department. We can see quite a beautiful query with joins. Everything is fine. And I'd like to mention that both for employee and department, all the fields, all the columns of the table will be pulled. It's not always good. I'll explain you how you can pull not all of them. And I mentioned join already. We did not write join explicitly, but it was generated. But you can also write it explicitly. For example, a department has a division, and this division has a head who is also the head, who is also the employee of the division. We want to pull all the employees and the head, and we do join. It's interesting that in join you can also use linked table by foreign key, and as a result we have 3 joins through these linked tables. But actually it's possible to write all 3 of them explicitly. Sometimes it's convenient to do it this way or that way. It depends on the context. So, I just mentioned that the query pulled all columns, but if we do not want to pull all of them, we just need to transform the result to some objects, for example, anonymous object, and write every field separately. What columns of tables we need. In that case, the query will have nothing extra, only the columns we need. Quite an interesting concatenation of lines at the side of DBMS is fulfilled in this case. This object is not anonymous, we only need columns. It can be done differently. There is AutoMapper library and the notion of mapping. I do not want to dwell upon it. Just once you need to initiate mapping rule. So, expression create map, it should be done once, and after that you do not need to write as much code. You add project 2 to your query and add the type.
Here you see the generated query, and then you will see only the fields that you need. So now we can pass to how you can write the query, how you can write a query on ORM and not drive your database mad and crazy. There are some peculiarities, but it takes too long to tell everything about this. But here you need to understand that this will be an SQL, and your query will be an SQL, and the result will be a plain table. And if you think in this paradigm, everything will be great, but then you need to check the outcome, and if something is bad, you need to think over again and optimize it. And then after some practice, you will proceed to better results. So real practice shows the query like this, and here you can see the lesser query. Why did it happen? There is a problem case, and I pointed it out in yellow. If you want to achieve this relation one-to-many, this is the same actually situation. The employee against other employees. There is a link to the class, but you can make an inverse property. Of course, there is one employee in the department, but the department consists of many employees. And in the query up there, you want to take out a collection of objects, but still there is another field relating. This means that you want to take out a hierarchical structure, but SQL produces only plain tables. That means if you will manually make it non-plain, the system will not understand what do you want from it, because this is an automatic system. How can we optimize this? You can use join and make a plain table out of it. Everything will be great afterwards. But if you want to make a hierarchy, you can use the results of the query and group it other way. So here you can see how the query is after the tailoring. Group by can work in some cases very well, in some cases not so great, but this is the matter of your practice. So we have query group to the average salary and the department. By identifier it works great. Without identifier, no. So you see the entity framework 6, it's not so beautiful, but the lower is better, and I could not imagine something better in SQL. But in entity framework core, the situation looks like this. We have a small query down here, but the query up is not so great. If you could take a look at it, you can see that there is no grouping. In this case, core says that I cannot generate a query. I will make a dump of all data and group it. But I think you don't want to have it. Still, you achieve warning message that all data will be grouped in the memory. But still, there is an option. You can make exception of warnings, and I would recommend you to find out all the queries and rewrite them, identify them, and it is possible to rewrite them, and then you use this option with exceptions. Of course, there are many other examples in queries, but the main thing is for you need to understand that you need to think like database. You need to understand how your query is reproduced in SQL, then check it on the out, and then you will be practiced. You will be experienced in it. And everything relates to any database management system. But we are speaking about Postgres today. Postgres is non-scalar. It has a support in ORM, and for example, for a massive, you need to write down a field in the class. You can guess it's massive, so you can find out the type. So massive ints, or public ints, or HStore. HStore is used in Postgres, is available in Postgres, and add key value type is also applied. There is an analogous type in Java, key value type. It also is mapped very well in both directions. JSON-B. Imagine we have a class of a table account. It has two fields, login and password, and other types of accounts are in JSON. But still, we can imagine that the structure of JSON is fixed, and there, for example, could be a defined name, family name, or date of birth. Imagine we want to have ORM to make ORM represented in this topic. So you can use a data mod. You can build up in the constructor wizard the contexts. Then you point out entity type, account, extra data field, and then you can write down what is serialized and what is not serialized, and then it works. For all non-scalar types, massives, edge stores, and JSON, mapping is applicable. It works. It can read and it can write. But if under condition of way you want to find some lines where the massive element is represented, ORM does not support it. What can you do here? The best is you can write down a query on SQL and execute it through Dapper or through somewhat different work, and you can make mapping by means of ORM. By the way, this is not the only query that is not executed by ORM. Recursive and queries are not supported by ORM. You need to use SQL and some other constructions, like for example here, grouping. Imagine we have a table of deal with a client and customer, ID of the customer company, and we want to aggregate for each client sum of deals. It's very easy. Count is supported by ORM, and actually the query in code is quite feasible and is generated. A good SQL is generated, but now make it harder. We don't want to have the deals count, but also we need to understand all the companies with which a client works, and we can make the command company deal distinct, and in C# language there is function count, but distinct count does not exist. It's commented here. If it could exist, we would uncomment this, but there is no function created for this language. Of course, you can find out how to write a more complex construction, but ORM will not think over how to processes create. ORM6 will register cores, and the cores will aggregate it in the memory. So we could take a look at several types of ORM non-applicable constructions. There is also IT-ORM core, alternative generators of queries, and it's a part of open source, and we could support these open source projects. So let us do this. What can we tell here? When we see the entity framework for the first time, Microsoft wrote the articles that it's great, the developers may not get to know about database management systems, that could just write down code and everything will work. But now we understand that you need to get to know SQL and work with SQL and understand how database works. In other way it will not go through, and you need just to be experienced here. You need to put off tracks and check SQL on the outcome. But then you may arrive at the question, do we need ORM? Is it better for us to write it in SQL? But still, there are pluses of ORM. The first, you can check syntaxes. Imagine you had a change of syntaxes in a field in a base or in a database, or delete a field. Then you can check all the text SQL queries, and this is not a trivial task. And in the ORM, everything can be made in a very simple way. You need to compile. You can compile only after everything is checked. ORM has escapings from SQL injections, and if you write SQL, you are in charge. And auto-testing, if you want to perform mock testing and mock reports, ORM can help you here. Tests and mocks. Where could we get profit from this? Of course, on integration tests, not on atomic tests. On mocks, you will just make a test of mocks. But if there is a complex way of interaction with a 2 or 3-story hierarchy, you can find many mistakes by yourself. And there's 10 minutes I have. In .NET Core, there is iMemory database out of the box. This is for tests, and for tests you have a mock of database management system, and you can use this DBMS and AT framework. There is no such things, but I worked a lot with generation of codes on the basis of one open source project, and I have my own generator that can be used in IF6, and I can I can give you a link. So, mock for Dapper. Someone asked me, perhaps you did not hear for the previous time. Of course, Dapper may suppose writing down of SQL, but okay, we've managed to understand reading, but how to write it? Batch update, when you need to update that data without loading on a client. So, like for example, our employees on department 2 plus 1,000 rubles to salary. There is a scheme in Dapper network. You need to store it on the client. Of course, this is not effective tool here, but there is also addition entity framework here, and entity framework plus net. You create query on select and update, and you can make it. If this is a very strange construction for you, this is not a new object. Of course, C# has expressions. Expressions are the codes that are not executed but interpreted in the way you like, and it is interpreted into SQL. And here, in loading to client, you just can add delete. This is an economic optimization. Here you can see some drawbacks with cache. Imagine you have one employee, you could add the salary, and you understand that this employee will have this plus to the salary. Then you take this employee out of the database, and you see that there was no change, because entity framework has cache, and entity framework understand that it loaded this employee, and this is the addition is not made by the same tools. So the system thinks the object is not changed. Of course, this is just an example, but there are many entities, many groups of entities. Imagine you've made 3 updates, and this point of intersection on the slide that you see, there will be an actual data, but still you can use the code to get rid of the cache, and you can reverse the method. Then everything will be great. You will take new data. It will not be taken from cache, but it will be updated from the base. Mock for this batch update. Out of the box, in-memory database NetCore cannot do this, but my tool, my example is here. You can make a copy or write or contact me per email, and I will tell you about it. So this is just a thing for the guys who work on Windows. Inserting of 100 entries by one code. Link to DB showed a very great result, but 20 seconds is not serious approach. Entity framework core and has twice more the twofold velocity. When I was a student, I wrote codes for this, but then I get to know multi-insert, and in one insert entry you could insert huge bulks of data, and there is nothing told about performance in the documents. And here we have an increase in speed. if we generate SQL as multi-insert, it is performed 2 times better than here, and you could make a hard code, you can generate it, you can use reflection, because C# is compiled in bytecode but not in machine code. You can dynamically refer to the properties, and everyone writes that it is not a great tool, but still it's not so big one. It is executed in 15 seconds, but we could reduce the time to 0.5 seconds, and playing with your member, I would not like to interpret it, but it's very easy for core, for network. Please use this tool, and it will increase your speed. And update is not a stupid one update. When we on the client side, on the part of the client, we are calculating the data that should be updated. In Postgres, starting from 9.5, we see insert conflict update, and we can use it together with multi-inserting together, and it was made in 9,000 seconds, so at a greater rate. Here in code you can see my experience. A part of SQL is written down as a text, and I want to replace it by insertions, like in the previous examples. Operator copy. I had a negative experience with MSSQL. MSSQL 12 has experiences great problems in this. I did not know how to work with .NET together with Postgres, and I was not sure that I really needed admin rights to access, and provider PGSQL does support it. But about MSSQL problems, Postgres does not ignore any triggers, and everything is great with transactions. Here's an example of code that inserts data by means of a copy, and here you see the results against multi-insert, and it's 40 times more efficient than EF core. And I think that copy plus update, we don't have any construction for copy. It has do update. You can copy to the temporary table and then make upsert to the end table. So this is the code. It is not working on best rate, and we have plus 25% growth. But in core we can use this still. In the end, as a recap, I can say that select, code for select is written on your language, but you need to mind the SQL code. You may put off tracking, you have a library for batch update, and you can use multi-insert, upsert, and copy to make it faster. My contacts, you can also contact me. It's a very good, you can find very good entity framework information and some generation of code. There are no documents here, but if you are interested, I can tell it to you about it. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Alexey. Now we have 5 minutes and you may ask your questions. Raise your hands, please, and we will give you your micro. Thank you very much, Alexey, for your information, for the presentation. And I have a question about the work with indexes that are granted by Postgres, like in ORM. No, it does not support it. In general, there are some problems in also with types of data in Postgres, but this is just a development. Of course, you can contribute here, and here there is a growing point of for indexes. I did not dig this topic, but I think it is not applicable for now.
Hello, thank you. I have a question. And for what tasks did you need to use copies? Copies? You mean it's not about inserting 2 to 10, no, millions of them. And the initial task, how was it formulated? Loading 1 million of what? Was it about restoring from some damp or, well, in the project, MySQL was used, but if Postgres copy had been used, it would have been better. It calculated planned work for a counted system for a large organization. They counted them in millions, so they prepared it for several years in advance. And here we had to do it within a very short time. Okay, thanks. Hello, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question. Have you ever experienced such a problem? Could you please speak a bit louder? And the framework has cache query for recompilation of SQL code. Have you ever faced such a problem when this cache is ignored, and even if one and the same query is fulfilled several times in a row, it is transformed every time? You mean that it doesn't use cache? Well, yes, frankly speaking, I haven't experienced it, because I said that it can be in the other way around. It addresses cache when it can be dumped, but we haven't had such problems. We can discuss when it happens. Hello. Is there any way to... Once again, is there any way to pull native functions from entity framework? Native functions are... you mean the ones that are stored there? No, native functions. Yes. Yes, there will be wraparound for them in the code. Okay, that's it then. Alexey, thank you for your presentation. Thank you. And all people that like classic Rover, please come to Keys concerts that will be conducted this summer within the framework of their final farewell tour. Keys, very good music. Hooray. Okay, we'll have our next presentation in 3 minutes.